I'm so glad you chose to be here once again. Just like last time, I want you to find a comfortable spot. Maybe take a deep breath and just give yourself credit for showing up. This work isn't easy, but it is the most important thing we can do. Carl Jung, a key figure in psychology, identified a particularly fascinating and complex personality type, the intuitive introvert. This type is unique not just because it's uncommon, but because of the intricate inner world it navigates. Unlike people who are focused on the outside world of facts, actions, and clear emotions, the intuitive introvert's life is primarily directed inward. They are deeply connected to a stream of symbols, images, and gut feelings that rise up from the unconscious mind. Their guidance comes from these inner visions, premonitions, and deep-seated patterns that most people don't perceive. This personality doesn't operate on straightforward logic or what can be proven with data. Instead, its compass is internal. It has a knack for grasping meanings that haven't fully formed yet, sensing shifts in the emotional or psychological atmosphere before they become obvious, and being guided by a powerful sensitivity to the unseen. From this perspective, the everyday world, with all its practical demands and logical rules, can often seem uninteresting or beside the point. This isn't out of arrogance, but because their attention is naturally pulled toward another dimension, a symbolic level of reality that they feel is more essential and often precedes what happens in the present. Jung described this type as someone who perceives what is on the verge of becoming, but isn't here yet. It's a way of seeing that is oriented toward potential, toward the seeds of the future that are gestating in the collective unconscious, the shared, inherited part of the human mind. This way of being makes the intuitive introvert highly sensitive to cultural, spiritual, and personal transformations long before they become visible to everyone else. However, this powerful sensitivity comes with a significant cost. The world around them doesn't operate on the same wavelength. Society tends to demand proof, tangible results, and objective facts. But what this personality type perceives is, by its very nature, intangible, at least at first. This creates a huge gap between their internal reality and what the external world expects of them. Frequently, their insights are dismissed, ignored, or even treated as a sign of mental instability. They are the kind of person who gets a strong, essential feeling about someone they've just met, who senses a major upheaval in the air before any crisis occurs, or who knows how something will turn out long before the evidence confirms it. But when they try to share these perceptions, they are often met with silence, disbelief, or outright rejection. Over time, this can lead them to retreat into silence, keeping their rich inner world a private, guarded space. It is in this very silence that a real danger can emerge. Jung issued a stark warning. When this personality type fails to find a way to translate their visions into something tangible, like language, art, or concrete action, they risk being overwhelmed by them. The inner world that should be a source of profound insight can turn into a prison. When these symbolic images are not integrated into conscious life, they can start to dominate the mind with a life of their own. The person is no longer the one observing the images, they become possessed by them. This is where Jung's cautionary note becomes critical. The gift of deep intuition, if not balanced and channeled, can lead to a state of dissociation from reality. Within Jung's framework, intuition is considered an irrational function. This doesn't mean it's illogical, but rather that it operates outside of linear step-by-step reasoning. For the intuitive introvert, this function is turned inward, exploring the depths of the unconscious. Unlike extroverted intuition, which looks for possibilities in the external world, introverted intuition listens to the inner world. It picks up on raw psychic images and symbolic forms that haven't yet been processed into clear thoughts or feelings. The intuitive introvert lives in constant dialogue with these images. They don't just see with their physical eyes, they perceive with the eyes of the soul. An ordinary situation might, to them, be filled with hidden meanings, invisible tensions, and repeating patterns that others miss. Their mind acts like an antenna tuned to these inner signals, which don't have a clear language, but carry significant psychic weight and energy. When this sensitivity is well integrated, it's a powerful source of wisdom. The intuitive introvert can grasp the deeper meaning of events, understand the unconscious motivations of others, and anticipate changes on the horizon. On the flip side, This same sensitivity makes them vulnerable. The function responsible for keeping us grounded in the present and in our bodies, what Jung called sensation, is often their weakest point. As a result, they can easily drift away from objective reality, getting lost in a sea of internal images. When this happens, their intuition starts to operate on its own, disconnected from practical life, and the individual can find themselves in a confusing, self-made, parallel reality. This inner world isn't necessarily chaotic, but it is uncontrollable. The symbolic images arise from a psychic need, not from conscious choice. When channeled properly, these visions can be the seeds of creativity, transformative ideas, healing symbols, and insightful stories. But if they aren't understood and processed, they can accumulate as psychic static, leading to confusion, an inability to act, and a breakdown of logical thinking. For the intuitive introvert, the first step toward a healthy life is to understand how their own intuition works. They need to learn to tell the difference between a genuinely revealing symbol and a baseless fantasy. This requires patience, quiet reflection, and a structured inner life. But it also comes with a warning. No matter how captivating this internal world is, it contains traps. A key feature of introverted intuition is that it doesn't operate in the present. It's naturally focused on what is to come, on what is not yet real but is hinting at its arrival on the edges of awareness. The intuitive introvert often feels like they are living on a threshold between the now and the not yet. They sense events approaching and perceive major shifts in the cultural and psychological landscape before they manifest. This anticipatory ability makes them, as Jung suggested, somewhat like a prophet, someone who sees what others can't yet see. But this position creates a fundamental dilemma. What they see cannot be proven, what they feel cannot be justified with facts, and what they intuit rarely finds agreement in others. This sets up a constant conflict between the inner clarity of their vision and the lack of external validation. The intuitive introvert may begin to doubt themselves, or they might swing to the other extreme and cling to their perceptions with such conviction that they reject the world around them entirely. In either case, the tension between the invisible world they perceive and the visible world that denies it can begin to erode their psychological well-being. Jung provided a powerful example of this with a patient who described seeing a black snake in her abdomen. As her therapy progressed, she envisioned the snake rising up through her body until it emerged from her mouth and transformed into a serpent with a golden head. To many, this would sound like a delusional fantasy, but Jung interpreted it as a clear symbol of inner transformation, a process of becoming a whole, integrated self, individuation, that was taking visual form in her unconscious. The black snake represented repressed parts of herself that, once confronted and integrated, were reborn as a symbol of healing and wisdom. This example perfectly illustrates how introverted intuition works. It doesn't speak in logic, but in images. It doesn't point to causes, but reveals potential destinies. The problem arises when these images have no outlet, when the symbol isn't translated into creation, reflection, or action. At that point, the vision, which was once a source of revelation, begins to close in on itself. The mind loses its ability to distinguish between insight and illusion, and what was symbolic wisdom can morph into a solitary delusion. The line between revelation and delusion is incredibly fine, and the intuitive introvert walks it every day. To prevent their intuition from turning into a psychic maze, it's crucial to understand the mechanisms that can lead to a break with reality. The intuitive introvert is often a solitary figure, not necessarily by choice, but because of their fundamental psychic makeup. Their focus is on what can't be seen, what hasn't taken shape yet. When this inner orientation doesn't find a way to connect with the external world, it can create a breeding ground for identity crises, and in more severe cases, delusions of grandeur. Jung termed this process inflation, the moment when the ego becomes bloated with unconscious content and starts to identify with powerful, archetypal figures without recognizing its own human limitations. This phenomenon can happen subtly. By perceiving deep symbolic patterns, the intuitive introvert might start to believe they have been chosen for a special mission. This feeling of being unique, while initially a valid reflection of their sensitivity, can twist into a messianic illusion. They may begin to see themselves as the bearer of absolute truths, a visionary misunderstood by a blind society. Criticism from others is then interpreted as persecution, and doubt is seen as a sign of others' inferiority. Isolation deepens, not as a consequence, but as a justification. No one understands me because I am more evolved. This kind of psychic inflation is dangerous because it dissolves self-awareness and self-criticism. The individual starts to live entirely within their own symbolic story, with no clear line between archetypal imagery and concrete reality. They might identify with archetypes like the wise old sage, the martyr, or the prophet, losing touch with their ordinary, flawed humanity. This over-identification leads to a fragmented psyche. The intuitive function, which once offered glimpses of profound meaning, becomes a vehicle for escape. Practical life is neglected. Relationships become tools to serve their narrative, and any contradiction is rejected as a threat to their inner vision. Jung observed that this pattern was common in individuals who emotionally isolated themselves and resisted adapting to the world. The greatest danger, he noted, wasn't the isolation itself, but what followed, the complete takeover of consciousness by the unconscious. When this occurs, the ego no longer acts as a mediator with reality, but becomes a passive vessel for symbolic images. Perception becomes distorted, judgment is clouded, and life begins to unfold in a subtly delusional fantasy world where everything seems to make sense, but nothing is grounded in shared reality. Yet not every encounter with the symbolic leads to collapse. There is an antidote, and it starts with the ability to express oneself. It begins with translating the invisible into form, whether through words, gestures, or art. When a symbolic vision finds a way to move from the private sphere into the world, it transforms from a prison into a creative act. The psychic survival of the intuitive introvert hinges on this ability to turn the invisible into something tangible. For Jung, an unexpressed symbol becomes like an autonomous agent within the psyche, a foreign body that hasn't been properly digested by consciousness. The only way to integrate these internal images is to give them a shape in the external world. Symbolic expression, whether through art, writing, music, or even ritual, is not just a creative hobby. It is a vital necessity for this type. This act of translating the symbolic into the real is what separates the creative visionary from the person lost in their own mind. When the intuitive introvert finds a way to externalize their perceptions, they turn their symbolic solitude into a form of communication, their strangeness into a new language, and their isolation into a source of impact. What was once an internal maze becomes a map that can be shared. This creative act has a dual benefit. It not only relieves internal psychic pressure, but also gives the collective a glimpse into parts of the human experience that were previously unconscious. History is filled with examples of figures who likely operated from this intuitive, introverted function. Franz Kafka, with his nightmarish and bureaucratic texts, channeled his symbolic sense of alienation into works that still capture the absurdity of modern life. Vincent van Gogh, unable to adapt to the practical world, poured his intense emotional and symbolic vision into his paintings, with each brushstroke a desperate attempt to translate a turbulent inner world. Even Jung himself, who recognized this type in his own personality, wrote his most profound works as an effort to translate his complex internal experiences into systems that others could understand. These examples show that symbolic expression is the bridge between the inner and outer worlds. Without this bridge, symbols accumulate, turn inward, and begin to distort one's perception of reality. But when there is an outlet, the inner image becomes a work, a gesture, or a word, and this process reorganizes the psyche. The intuitive function is no longer operating in the dark. It begins to collaborate with consciousness. Creativity, then, is not just a gift, but a process of psychological integration. However, even the richest symbolic expression might not be enough if it isn't rooted in reality. The intuitive introvert, by their very nature, tends to neglect the body, daily routines, and concrete limitations, which exposes them to further risks. Creation can become a compulsion, and inspiration can turn into a form of escape. True integration only happens when the symbol also finds a sensory foundation, when intuition is balanced by sensation. The intuitive function, especially in its introverted form, operates outside of time, the body, and linear thinking. It dives deep into the unconscious, gathers symbols and premonitions, and returns to the surface with visions that don't belong to the concrete world. This ability is what gives the intuitive introvert their enigmatic brilliance. But it's also what makes them vulnerable. Without an anchor, without a solid grounding in the present, this intuition can become a dangerous whirlpool. This is why Jung stressed the importance of integrating the inferior function, which for the intuitive introvert is sensation. Sensation is the function that keeps us connected to the here and now, to our bodies, and to the material world. It perceives what is tangible, the warmth of the sun on the skin, the taste of coffee, the weight of an object in our hands. For the intuitive introvert, who tends to dismiss these perceptions as mundane, sensation can feel like a foreign language. But it is precisely this language that offers the antidote to excessive abstraction. It is in the materiality of simple, everyday things that this type can find balance. Activities like walking, cooking, gardening, practicing a manual craft, or simply sticking to a routine can provide this grounding. Returning to the body, to routine, and to the present moment does not diminish the depth of their symbolic world. It sustains it. When this type learns to move between their deep intuitive dives and concrete, practical actions, their visions cease to be disorienting labyrinths and instead become rooted. They become capable of navigating between two worlds, the internal and the external, the invisible and the tangible. This ability to move between both is the hallmark of true psychological maturity. The symbol then stops being an object of passive observation and becomes a real guiding force that shapes life decisions and relationships, not as a mystical oracle, but as a reliable inner compass. Everyday rituals in this context take on a therapeutic role. They don't need to be grand or esoteric. They can be as simple as lighting a candle each morning, writing in a journal at the end of the day, or intentionally organizing a workspace. These small acts create an anchor in the midst of internal chaos. They are gestures that communicate to the unconscious. There is order, there is a body, there is reality. It is in this ritualized space that the symbol can be brought down to earth without overwhelming the psyche. Integrating sensation is not a limitation. It's what allows intuition to flourish in a healthier, more powerful way. Even when the intuitive introvert develops methods for symbolic expression and builds practices to anchor themselves in reality, they still face one final, formidable challenge: sustaining their own inner truth in a world that systematically rejects the invisible. Modern culture, with its focus on the concrete, the immediate, and the measurable, values objective results, data, productivity, and visible performance. Deep intuitions, symbolic visions, and quiet reflections are not just ignored. They are often ridiculed, pathologized, or dismissed as irrelevant. This creates a constant tension for the intuitive introvert between being true to their own soul and the need to adapt. At every turn, they face a choice: betray their inner vision to fit in with the collective conversation, or remain faithful to themselves, even if it means facing marginalization, misunderstanding, and loneliness. This choice isn't just theoretical, it shows up in the small details of daily life. In conversations where they have to silence what they truly think, in work environments where their silence is misinterpreted as weakness, and in jobs where they feel they cannot express what they see, feel, or sense without being deemed inappropriate. But this tension doesn't have to lead to surrender. Jung argued that the journey of individuation requires exactly this: holding on to the symbolic core of the self, even against the opposing forces of the collective. For the intuitive introvert, living their symbolic truth doesn't mean withdrawing from the world. It means navigating through it without losing their internal compass. It means knowing that the vision they carry may never be fully understood or recognized, yet it still must be lived. In the end, the purpose of their intuition is not to please, convince, or win arguments. It is to point toward paths that do not yet exist. Living symbolically in a materialistic society is a quiet act of resistance. It is choosing depth over appearances and meaning over convenience. It is maintaining a connection with the invisible, even when everything around them insists it has no value. But when this type finds the courage to remain true to what they see, they can become a transformative figure, not by imposing their will on the world, but by revealing, simply through their presence, that there is more to reality than what lies on the surface. And this revelation, no matter how subtle, has the power to touch, disturb, and inspire those who are ready to perceive it. This journey isn't about achieving perfection, but about embracing your true self. It's about finding your way back home to who you are, stepping out of any limitations, and finally recognizing the warmth and light of your own inherent worth? You deserve this. You always have. Thanks for watching. If this resonated, please like this video and subscribe to stay updated. I look forward to continuing this journey with you. Until next time, take care and be present.